Hi, my name's Adam. I came home early that night, after 3 weeks on the road, hoping to surprise my family. But when I opened the door, I found my father, on the floor, curled up like a discarded coat, torn clothes, bare feet. And my wife? She stepped on him, laughed, said, "Oh, he's just the old servant." Then her parents did the same, wiped their shoes on the man who raised me. No one looked shocked. No one even paused. And me? I didn't scream. I didn't say a word. I just stepped forward, and in that second, the whole room froze. Because sometimes, the ugliest betrayals aren't the ones shouted. They're the ones whispered behind doors you thought were yours. And what happened next, no one in that room will ever forget. I had landed an hour earlier than expected. The flight home from Chicago was smooth, maybe too smooth. I didn't even need to wait for my bag. I only had a carry-on, and for once, the airport parking lot wasn't packed. As I drove down our quiet suburban street, I noticed the porch light was on. That wasn't unusual, but something in me felt aware. Aware in the way only husbands get after years of reading between silences. I parked just far enough so the car wouldn't be heard from inside. Call it silly, but I wanted to surprise them, my wife, our daughter, and mostly, my father. He'd moved in last year after his stroke. We set up the downstairs room for him, with a walk-in shower and a recliner he liked. I remember telling myself this would bring us closer. He had raised me alone after Mom passed. It felt right to be there for him now. I was picturing his face, old but still stern, probably watching baseball on the couch, dozing off with the TV on too loud. I was picturing my daughter running to me yelling, "Daddy!" like she used to when she was 5. That's the image I had in my head as I turned the key. I didn't knock. It was my home. But inside, it didn't feel like home. No one called out. No little footsteps. No TV noise. Only muffled voices deeper in the house. Unfamiliar voices. The entryway smelled faintly of perfume, not the vanilla scent my wife always sprayed in the hallway. The shoes by the door weren't mine. Men's dress shoes, women's heels, polished, lined up, and expensive. Then my eyes dropped to the floor. There, on the welcome mat, only it wasn't welcoming at all, was a man. Curled, still, face down, wearing clothes that didn't fit right, faded and torn. His shoes were off, feet bare and swollen. His hand trembled slightly, just enough to know he wasn't asleep. The posture wasn't one of comfort, but of placement. Deliberate. It was my father, and he was lying where the shoes belonged. He didn't see me, or maybe he did, but he didn't move. My hand let go of the suitcase handle, and it thudded softly onto the floor. I didn't move. My brain started playing tricks on me. Maybe he fell. Maybe this was temporary. Maybe the medication made him dizzy again. But then I noticed. His face was clean. His hands, too. Too clean. Like someone had wiped them down. His shirt had footprints on the back. Dark marks, scuffed. His body wasn't crumpled. It was tucked, like a pillow against the wall. No one had helped him. And yet, someone had used him. I stood still, trying to understand the absurdity of it. My feet glued to the hardwood, my pulse in my ears. I couldn't speak. Then I heard it. Laughter. From the living room, just around the corner. Someone said, "Don't mind him, he's just the old helper. He doesn't talk much." A woman's voice. Clear, confident. So casual it made my stomach turn. It was my wife. She sounded like she was talking about a piece of furniture. More footsteps came. A man's voice chuckled. "Strange thing to keep around," he said, as if talking about a rug. I didn't step in. I didn't yell. I just watched how no one flinched at what they were walking past. My father, once a man who never let a bill go unpaid, who built shelves with his own hands, who taught me how to tie a tie and how to stand straight, was now being stepped over like debris. And the worst part? He let it happen. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look scared. He just looked gone, empty, and yet alive enough to know what was happening. That was when I felt it. Not anger, not sorrow, not yet. Just the splintering edge of something breaking beneath my ribs, the soundless snap of trust collapsing. And I knew, in that moment, something in this house had shifted far deeper than I could yet name. That was the moment I understood this wasn't an accident. It was a decision. I stepped fully inside and closed the door behind me. The soft click of the latch felt louder than it should have. I stood there, still gripping my suitcase handle, trying to process what I had just walked into. From the entryway, I could see straight through to the living room. Lights were warm, the kind meant for entertaining. A few people milled around with wine glasses. Someone was arranging snacks on the coffee table like it was any other Friday night get-together. There were candles lit. Music played low from a speaker tucked on the shelf. Something jazzy and forgettable. This wasn't chaos. This was intentional. My father was still there behind me, just to the left of the door. He hadn't moved, and no one had helped him up. They had simply stepped over him. I moved in another step, then another, dragging my suitcase softly along the floor. The first person to look up was a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, loafers. His eyes met mine, flickered with confusion, then moved on like he had just seen the mailman walk in by mistake. And then came her voice. "Oh, you're home early." She smiled like nothing was wrong. My wife. Her hair was done, lips painted red. She looked like she was hosting a charity dinner. She walked toward me with that same poise she used in public, the one that smoothed over anything inconvenient. Without a pause, she turned to the guests and said, "This is my husband. He wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday." Then, with a laugh that barely touched her eyes, she gestured toward my father and added, "Don't mind him. That's just the old servant. He gets in the way sometimes, but he's mostly quiet." Just the old servant. She said it like she was talking about a broken lamp that still gave a little light. My chest didn't tighten. It locked. The room didn't flinch. One of the guests chuckled awkwardly. Another took a sip of wine and looked anywhere but at the man on the floor. I felt like I'd stepped into someone else's house. someone else's lie. Then her father walked in from the kitchen, holding a bowl of chips. He paused, saw my dad, and said, without even making eye contact, "You again? Don't block the door. It's rude." And like that, he stepped over my father's legs, carefully, like avoiding a puddle. Her mother followed behind. He always does this when we have people over. It's his way of, I don't know, seeking attention? She wiped the heel of her shoe on his pant leg, like it was a doormat. My throat was dry, but I still couldn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure who I would say it to. The people in this room didn't look like family. They didn't look like strangers either. They looked like people who had built an entire world without me, and justified every inch of it. My eyes scanned the room. No one protested. No one whispered, "Is that really okay?" They stood there, holding drinks, making small talk, laughing politely, as if my father wasn't right there on the ground. It was the silence that told me everything, because silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's permission. I looked down again at him. He was facing the wall now, as if hiding. His breathing was slow. His hands were folded beneath his chest, like he'd done this before, like he knew how to protect the softer parts of himself. He didn't look up at me, but he moved his hand just slightly back behind him, palm open, a gesture, not to help him up, but to tell me, not now. He was telling me not to speak, not to blow this up, because he knew what I didn't, that anything I said would become the problem. Not what they'd done, not how they had used him, but that I had disrupted their night. And he wasn't wrong. I looked around once more and realized if I spoke, if I even asked, "What the hell is going on?" they would twist it. My wife would say I was stressed. Her parents would act offended. The guests would nod along, because that's easier than facing something uncomfortable. So I did nothing. For now. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. Anger in this room would be a weapon they used against me, not something that changed anything. I stepped aside, left my suitcase by the stairs. No one noticed. No one cared. I moved toward the kitchen as if I were just any other man walking into his home. But inside, I was burning. That's when I remembered how long this had been happening and how carefully it had been hidden. I didn't move. Not yet. I stood near the kitchen doorway, pretending to check my phone, pretending I had a reason to stand still. In truth, I was buying time. The image of my father on the floor had faded from my eyes, but not from inside me. It was lodged there now, in the place where memories become instruction. The voices in the living room carried on behind me, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loud at something not funny. I didn't listen. I couldn't, because something deeper was rising up. Not anger, exactly. Not yet. Just a realization pressing itself against the front of my mind. This wasn't new. This had been happening little by little, long before I noticed. I kept my back to them and let the sound of the party blur into the background. My mind slipped somewhere else, somewhere quieter. The day my father moved in with us. It had been my idea. After the stroke, it only made sense. His apartment downtown wasn't safe anymore. No elevator, cracked tiles in the bathroom, those 2 steep stairs. I told him we'd convert the guest room. I told him it would be temporary. I told myself it would be good for our daughter to have more time with her grandfather. He never argued. When we brought him home, he carried only 2 bags. That's all he said he needed. A few clothes, some books, an old photo album. I remember my wife standing at the front door, smiling too wide. "It'll be nice having a man of the house around," she'd joked. But the way she avoided eye contact told me she meant something else entirely. At first, everything seemed fine. He was quiet, as always, read the paper in the mornings, folded laundry even when we told him not to, walked our daughter to the bus stop when he had the strength. But slowly, the tone around him began to shift. It started with small things. My wife saying, "It's just easier if I do his prescriptions," or "He gets confused with online banking." I didn't question it. I told myself she was being helpful. Then she took over his phone account. "To simplify the billing," she said. She began locking up the liquor cabinet, saying he didn't need the temptation, though he hadn't had a drink in 15 years. Eventually, the door to his room got replaced with one that didn't fully close. "So we can hear him in case he falls," she explained. But it was also so he couldn't shut us out. I saw these changes, and I said nothing, because nothing looked wrong. It all came wrapped in phrases like safe, efficient, practical. I told myself it was care, but it wasn't care. It was control. Polite, quiet, and strategic. She didn't yell. She didn't insult him. She simply reduced him, inch by inch, until the man who used to hold court at the dinner table now asked if he was allowed to finish the leftovers. He never pushed back, not once. And I used to wonder why he didn't tell me it hurt, why he didn't raise his voice or even his eyes. One night, maybe 6 months in, I caught him standing at the sink, washing a single plate. It was almost midnight. Everyone else was asleep. I asked him, "Dad, does any of this bother you?" He dried his hands slowly and sat down. Then he said something I didn't understand until today. "I don't want to make it harder for you." I asked, "What do you mean?" He looked tired but clear. "You've got enough to deal with. If I push back, it'll come down on you, and it's not worth it." I told him, "But this is your house too." He smiled softly. "No, son. It's yours. I'm just a guest. And guests don't complain." I felt something in my stomach twist. "You're not a guest. You're my father." He reached out and patted my hand like he was the one comforting me. Exactly. He believed deep in his bones that enduring kept the family together, that being silent was the cost of love. And more than anything, he feared being a burden. That word, burden, had shaped his entire life since Mom died. He'd rather be overlooked than be in the way. He'd rather be stepped over than stepped out of our lives. And in some messed up, quiet, noble way, that made sense to him. Back in the present, I turned slightly and looked toward the entryway again. He hadn't moved, not an inch. His eyes were closed now. The party went on, but I saw him differently. His silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. A shield. One he built so we wouldn't have to carry the weight he thought belonged only to him. And suddenly, I felt ashamed. Not just for what was being done to him, but for how long I had let it happen. How I had let polite language cover cruelty. How I had accepted he's fine because it was easier than asking what wasn't. I realized something else, too. Silence gets passed down. Like a family recipe nobody questions. Like a habit worn into the floorboards. But it doesn't have to stay. Right then, I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream. I just knew. Something in me shifted, quietly but completely. I didn't raise my voice, but I knew the next thing I did would change how they saw me. The sound in the room thinned, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. Laughter that had filled the space just moments ago dissolved into an awkward hush, leaving behind only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock above the dining table. No one said a word, and I didn't move. I let the stillness do the speaking. The weight of what wasn't being said began pressing down on everyone. I could feel it. They were waiting for me to crack, to raise my voice, to swing my arms or shout, "What the hell is wrong with you people?" Something loud, something they could use to make me the problem. But I gave them nothing. Not yet. Instead, I stood there, not stiff, not threatening, just present, calm, watching. I scanned the room like someone seeing it for the first time. On the couch, my wife's father shifted in his seat, trying to appear relaxed but betraying himself with a glance that kept flickering toward the floor, toward my father, still lying there, motionless. Her mother sat beside him, fingers pinching the stem of a wine glass too tightly, lips pressed into a line. The guests, neighbors, a few co-workers of hers, maybe a cousin I hadn't seen in years, had begun to fidget. Their laughter stopped, but none of them got up. No one asked questions, and no one helped. I locked eyes with a man I vaguely recognized from the HOA board. He looked down quickly, pretending to check his watch. A woman by the fireplace, one of my wife's yoga friends, I think, rubbed her neck, then crossed and uncrossed her legs like she couldn't find a position that made her feel safe. They weren't confused. They were uncomfortable, because they knew what this was. And still, not one of them moved. I took a breath, let it out slowly, and then I stepped forward. Just one step, but in that moment, the whole room shifted. The step wasn't toward my father. It wasn't toward anyone. It was into the center of the space. A quiet claiming, like drawing a line on the ground without saying a word. People straightened. A few gasped, though I hadn't touched a thing. My silence, that long, charged pause, had grown larger than any shout could have managed. Someone tried to chuckle, a high-pitched sound that died mid-breath. A wine glass clinked against a plate too loudly. I didn't flinch. My wife's voice, when it finally came, was too cheerful. "Oh, honey, we weren't expecting you back tonight." She said it like I'd walked in on a casual dinner party, like the man lying at the entrance was a misplaced umbrella. I didn't answer. I just looked at her. She adjusted her sweater, stood, smoothed the front of her skirt. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the tiny flickers of a brain scanning for narrative control. Something she could say that would wrap this scene in plausible deniability. She didn't have it yet, but she was looking. Her father leaned forward slightly, ready to follow her lead. But I kept looking at her, not accusing, just watching. She cleared her throat. "Your dad must have slipped or something. We were just about to—" I took another step, not fast, not aggressive, just steady, deliberate. She stopped speaking. Now I stood almost directly between her and my father. The message wasn't subtle. I didn't look down at him yet. I didn't reach for him. That moment would come, but not until they saw what they were doing. I could feel my own pulse slow, my mind clearer than it had been in hours, maybe days. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to keep the peace. I was holding the line, and they knew it. My wife crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. Her mother opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but the words never made it out. They weren't used to this version of me, the one who didn't rush to explain or smooth over or laugh it off. The silence grew. No one dared to fill it. I could see the story unraveling in their heads. They were realizing, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't here to play along, that every polite cruelty they'd justified as just tradition or just teasing or just how we are was now under the light, and I wasn't blinking. My eyes dropped, finally, to my father. He still hadn't moved, but I noticed the smallest flicker, a barely there shift of his fingers, almost like a signal. Not yet. He wasn't asking for help. He was giving me space to decide how this ended. I stayed right where I was. I didn't reach down. Not because I didn't want to, but because he was teaching me something even now. Don't flinch. Don't rush. Make them see it. My wife's voice came again, but softer now. "Can we talk privately?" I didn't respond. My silence wasn't rudeness. It was precision. And it worked. The room knew something had changed. They couldn't name it yet, but they felt it. My wife's father rubbed his knee, leaned back as if trying to disappear into the couch. A guest near the hallway took a quiet step backward, as if unsure whether to excuse herself or wait for permission. And that's when it happened. Something small. A noise. From the corner by the bookshelf, I heard it. A sniff. Then the soft rustle of fabric. It was my daughter. I hadn't seen her come in. She must have been sitting low, out of view behind the armchair. She stood up slowly, a stuffed bear clutched tight against her chest, and her eyes. They were wide and wet, and staring straight at me. That's when something small broke the silence, and showed me I wasn't the only one who remembered the truth. I hadn't taken my eyes off her yet, my daughter. Her tiny fingers gripped that stuffed bear like it was the only thing holding her upright. She didn't speak, just stood there, half behind the armchair, half in the open. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, too. But she didn't look away. And that's when it happened. A short, sharp sound, more piercing than any scream. A glass slipped from someone's hand and struck the hardwood floor. It didn't shatter completely, just cracked, enough to split the air. The room flinched in unison. It was like someone had snapped a thread no one realized was pulled so tight. No one needed to ask whose hand it fell from. We all looked toward the same spot without being told. The man stood near the bookshelf, tall, graying at the temples, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit his frame anymore. He didn't bend down to pick the glass up, just stared at it on the floor like it had betrayed him. I knew him instantly. His name was Carl Anders. Years ago, he worked with my father, back when they both had jobs with dignity, before time and health and family dynamics turned men like them into afterthoughts. I hadn't seen Carl in maybe 8-10 years. His hair was thinner, shoulders sloped, but the worry on his face, that hadn't changed. And that, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. He remembered. Carl had history here, not just as a guest, but as someone who knew the before, someone who once sat at our table when my father carved the turkey, not when he lay beside the entryway like discarded furniture. His eyes flicked toward my father, quick, reluctant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to look. And that reaction, that hesitation, it said more than any confession. He knew what this was. Maybe not all of it, but enough to feel it in his bones. I didn't say anything, didn't nod, didn't call his name. I didn't want to pull him into the center before he was ready, or worse, before the room figured out who he really was to us. Still, the ripple had begun. The other guests, those who had been smiling politely just moments ago, started shifting, straightening their backs, crossing arms, whispering with their eyes, though their lips stayed still. Someone near the drink table stepped away like they'd realized they were too close to something ugly. Another man tugged at his tie, eyes darting between me and my wife, like trying to calculate where this was headed. It was subtle, but the spell was breaking. This wasn't just an awkward moment anymore. It was a problem, and no one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of it. I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because saying anything too soon might ruin what was unfolding. The shift wasn't loud, but it was real. I could feel it. Even the silence had changed. It wasn't just mine anymore. I glanced once more at Carl. He hadn't moved, still staring at the cracked glass. His face was pale, jaw tense. I imagined the war playing out in his head, decades of social training screaming, "Stay out of it," against whatever part of him still had a spine left. I understood that feeling too well. I also understood the cost of doing nothing. I wanted to walk over, put a hand on his shoulder, or at the very least, speak his name. But I didn't. Because right now, this room was like a chessboard. One wrong move, one emotional outburst, and I'd lose all position. So I held still. Again. It was the most exhausting thing I'd done all night. Behind me, my father hadn't moved, but now the weight of his presence was undeniable. Guests were aware of him, even if they pretended not to be. The tension wasn't coming from me anymore. It was coming from the fact that his stillness now demanded response. He hadn't moaned, hadn't whimpered, hadn't even cleared his throat. But his quiet dignity, it filled the room like smoke. and the longer no one addressed it, the heavier it got. This wasn't just awkward anymore. It was morally confusing. People were starting to see it, starting to feel it. But seeing isn't choosing. Not yet. I knew better than to believe the room would turn just because it got uncomfortable. People cling to comfort, even when it's laced with cruelty, especially when it is. Across the room, my wife shifted her weight. Subtle, calculated. Her lips pressed together, then parted, about to speak. Her eyes were scanning, looking for where she could steer the story next. I knew that look, and so did her parents. They weren't lounging anymore. Her father sat forward, elbows on his knees. Her mother pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the room wasn't cold. They were recalibrating. Something was about to be said, not offhand, not casual, intentional. I could feel it. The show was ending, and whatever came next would not be accidental. Before I could decide what silence would cost me next, she spoke and changed the rules of the room. Her voice was smooth, practiced, but this time softer than before, as if we were no longer in a crowd, but a dinner table surrounded by close family. She even smiled, the kind that wasn't meant to reassure, but to disarm. "There's been some confusion," she began, her tone laced with honeyed restraint. "I think maybe emotions got stirred up, but this is really just family business, nothing more." Family business. The words landed heavy in the air, not like an explanation, but a wall. I watched the subtle nods from a few guests, eager for permission to disengage, to absolve themselves from the discomfort now coating the room. She wasn't explaining, she was containing. I'd seen her do this before, many times, just never so publicly. She knew how to make cruelty sound like a misunderstanding, how to spin deliberate acts into emotional misfires. And now, with a carefully measured pause, she glanced around and added, "Sometimes in families, things get messy, but we handle our own. Handle our own." The message was clear. Outsiders need not look deeper. Her parents stepped in seamlessly, like they'd rehearsed it. Her mother cleared her throat, laying a gentle hand on a guest's arm. "These kinds of evenings can get tense when there's history involved," she said, with that signature charm that had fooled so many. "Let's not forget, everyone here is just trying their best." Her father chimed in too, smiling at the crowd like he was making a toast. "I think we could all use a refill and a reset. Let's not let a small moment define the evening, shall we?" The trap was setting, and they expected me to walk into it. I felt the pressure, not loud, but persistent. The way eyes shifted away, the way bodies subtly turned back toward drinks and small talk. The social choreography was reactivating, designed to silence dissent without ever raising a hand. But then I saw it. Not hidden, not carelessly left out, no. Placed just so on the side table near the stairs, half tucked under an unopened envelope. A folder. Tan-colored, slim, intentional. Something about it pulled me. While the guests busied themselves with manufactured laughter and clinking glasses, I stepped closer, just enough to read the tabs inside. My last name, my father's name. A glance told me more than I was prepared for. Power of attorney, signed months ago. Access forms for his retirement account. Bank letters about a closed safety deposit box. Property adjustments. Wording that, while legal, felt cold and surgical. None of it illegal, but all of it quietly predatory. It hadn't been a series of small decisions, like they always claimed. It was a campaign. A quiet, well-documented transfer of control, orchestrated not out of love, but out of strategy. And I hadn't seen it. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to. I reached for the folder, but didn't open it. Just held it. The weight of it was heavier than the paper inside. When I turned back toward the room, the laughter had thinned again. Some had noticed what I was holding. That's when I spoke. No fury, no raised voice, just calm, controlled. This isn't just family business anymore, I said evenly, addressing no one and everyone at once. When you use someone's vulnerability to take their choices, their finances, their home, that's not family. That's abuse. I didn't need to say elder abuse. The term hovered there, fully formed, even if I didn't speak it aloud. The shift was instant, not dramatic, but deep. Some guests froze mid-sip. Others lowered their eyes. A couple actually looked toward my father for the first time. Really looked. Still, the response came quick. My wife gave a short, dry laugh. "Are you serious?" Her parents, too, almost in unison. Her mother scoffed, waving a hand toward the folder like it was a prop. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, now with more force. "Those papers were handled properly. He signed them willingly. You were consulted." "You didn't object then," her father added, tightening his voice. "And now, in front of company, you're going to make a scene over paperwork?" They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were angry because I had finally said it. Because I was forcing them to drop the mask in front of witnesses. And yet, even now, they expected me to back down. That's the part that stunned me. They thought shame would stop me. That the threat of disrupting dinner parties and social decorum would make me tuck the folder away and smile politely. They mistook my silence for weakness. But I wasn't silent anymore. And it wasn't weakness. It was precision. I didn't respond to their accusations, didn't argue about who signed what or when. I let the weight of what I didn't say speak louder. But inside, I felt it. The collapse. This wasn't a fight I could walk away from now. No matter what came next, something had been broken that couldn't be fixed with apologies or platters of dessert. I looked down at the folder in my hands. I could feel my father's name under my thumb. Then I looked at him, still quiet, still on the floor. And something in me shifted. This was no longer about whether I should act. It was about when and how. Because silence now wasn't neutrality. It was consent. That was when my father finally spoke. And what he said took away my last excuse to stay quiet. "That's enough," my father said. Not loud, but firm. The kind of voice I hadn't heard from him in years. Not since before the cane, before the shift. Before the house wasn't his anymore. His voice landed like a hush over the room. I signed those papers because I didn't want him to lose everything, he continued, eyes steady on the coffee table. Not because I was confused, not because I was forced, because I knew if I pushed back, he'd be the one blamed for stirring up trouble. My chest tightened. There it was, the confession I never asked for, but had always suspected. He turned his head slightly toward me. I didn't want you to have to choose between being a son and being a husband. That single sentence stripped me bare. I didn't speak. I couldn't. His words weren't a weapon, but they cut deeper than anything thrown at me all night. And that's when they moved. My wife clapped her hands softly together, as if she'd been waiting for her cue. "There," she said, her voice sweet and smooth. "See? He chose this. Out of love, out of peace. Isn't that what we all want?" Her mother leaned in next. "Of course it's hard for you," she added, addressing the room, not me. "You've been away so much. Work, long hours. Maybe you didn't notice how much your father was struggling." That pivot was fast, too fast to be spontaneous. "He needed help," her father added, stepping closer. "We stepped in because you were too busy to notice what was slipping through the cracks." I stared at them, not surprised, but still stunned. They weren't defending themselves. They were erasing me. "Do you remember," my wife said, turning to one of the guests on the far end of the room, "that dinner last fall when he forgot to bring Dad's medication? We had to drive back to their house to get it." She didn't wait for an answer. "That wasn't a one-time thing. It's been hard watching him juggle everything." Then, like a magician's reveal, she reached into the drawer near the hallway entrance and pulled out a thin folder. Not the same one from earlier, a different color, blue. Already opened. Ready. "Look, I wasn't going to bring this out," she said, sounding reluctant. "But maybe it'll help explain things better." She held up a bank statement, a handful of account activity pages, transfers between names, no context, no notes, just enough noise to cast shadow. I barely recognized some of the entries. Payments I'd made months ago, covering my father's hospital bill, repairs at his old place after the storm damage. "He accessed joint funds without asking," she said quietly, like she was ashamed for me. A few heads turned. "I covered his medical bills," I finally said. "And we didn't say a word then, did we?" she replied, eyes wide, mock hurt. "Because we knew you meant well. But it wasn't sustainable." Now it wasn't about my father anymore. It was about me. That was the play. "I'm not trying to accuse anyone," she added gently. "But when it starts to affect the family's stability, we have to ask, where's the boundary?" It landed like a slap. The room had shifted. Again. No one was confronting me directly, but the air was heavier. A few guests looked down. One of them whispered something into their spouse's ear. The man who dropped the glass earlier was watching with a narrowed gaze now, like he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. My father sat quietly again, folding in on himself. The spotlight had moved. I was in it now, fully, and they knew it. I wanted to argue, to lay it all out, explain each payment, every choice I'd made, show text threads, voicemails, moments they never saw. But I knew the trap now. If I defended myself directly, I'd look like the unstable one. If I said nothing, I'd look guilty. It was a perfect trap, polished by years of practice. The same kind of social ambush they'd used to isolate my father, now turned on me. I glanced down at the blue folder again. This wasn't justice. This was strategy. And yet, I could feel something shifting in me. A calm that didn't come from giving up, but from clarity. They thought the documents, the statements, the carefully worded doubts would make me unravel. They thought their timing, their voices, their public performance would drive the knife in and twist it. They thought they were winning. But that's the thing about people like them. They assume that if you don't fight back in the moment, you've lost. I didn't respond. Not because I was cornered. Because I saw the mistake they had made, the fatal flaw in their performance. They believed the room belonged to them again. And that's exactly why I finally knew when to end it. Not with noise, not with anger, with precision. I straightened my back and took one step forward, slow and steady. My voice didn't rise above conversational, but it cut through the room just the same. Everyone, please don't leave yet. A few people glanced toward the door. One man reached for his coat, hand hovering. I didn't move to block him. I didn't need to. Tonight, you've all seen pieces, I said, and I think it's only fair you see the whole picture. No one answered, but the tension in the room thickened. I wasn't asking permission. I was closing a door, not physically, but morally. The kind of door people feel in their gut when it shuts. My wife blinked, then gave a small, dismissive laugh. "Come on," she said, brushing her hand in the air. "Let's not turn this into something it's not." Her voice was tight, too tight. We all know emotions run high around the holidays. Miscommunications, they happen. But dragging everyone into it like some courtroom? She looked around the room, searching for nods. It's not fair. I didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. Her father jumped in next, as if on cue. "This has gone far enough," he said, voice clipped, polite. "People have places to be. This is family business. We shouldn't ask guests to get involved." "And frankly," her mother added, her pearls shifting as she stood straighter, "I think it's in everyone's best interest to wrap this up gracefully." Their tone was sugar on glass, coated civility with a crackling edge. But I stayed still, didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the side table, one no one had paid attention to all night, and bent down. Slowly, carefully, I picked up my father's old shoes, brown leather, scuffed at the heels, a broken lace tied in a knot that had been there for over a year. I carried them to the center of the room and placed them down, side by side, where everyone could see. Then I looked at my father, sitting quietly again near the armchair, and said the only sentence I needed. He wore these the day they took the bank from his name. The room didn't gasp. No one dropped a glass. But something cracked beneath the surface. The silence that followed didn't need volume to make noise. One guest sat forward slightly. Another turned their eyes to the window. And then he spoke. The man near the fireplace. The one who'd dropped his glass earlier. Older. Quiet. A long-time friend of the family, but rarely involved. "I remember," he said simply. "They called it a restructuring. Said it was for his own good." My wife's eyes snapped toward him. "You weren't even part of that meeting," she said quickly. He didn't blink. "I was in the lobby." He looked ashamed. That man had spent 35 years building that account. No drama in his tone, just facts. More powerful than any accusation. The center of gravity in the room shifted again. This time, for good. No one said a word. No one moved. The carefully constructed story, how they'd framed me, shaped my father's decisions, spun motives, was now exposed, not by yelling, but by quiet truth. No outburst, no proof waved in the air. Just the shoes. Just one sentence. Just one witness who couldn't unsee what he'd always known. My wife's mouth opened, then closed. Her parents glanced at each other, as if trying to rewrite strategy mid-sentence. But there was nothing to do now. Nothing left to shape. They weren't losing because I won. They were losing because there was nowhere left to hide. And in that stillness, deafening, complete, I felt something I hadn't all evening. Release. No one apologized. No one collapsed in guilt. But the room saw. They saw. And that was enough. It wasn't about justice or revenge. It was about ending the lie. I looked at my father once more, and he looked back. And I finally understood. We didn't need them to say they were wrong. We just needed them to stop pretending they were right. The room held its breath. Then the silence finally broke. But it wasn't with apologies. It was with consequences. The kind that don't come with shouting or slamming doors. The kind that settle into a room like dust after the shelves have been wiped bare. Quiet. Final. One by one, the guests began to leave. No handshakes, no parting words. Just a shuffle of feet on hardwood floors, averted eyes, and coats pulled a little too quickly from the rack. There was no scene, no accusations hurled, no calls to stay and fix what couldn't be fixed. But the shift had already happened. It lived in the way phones quietly came out of pockets, in the soft murmur of someone asking a lawyer friend to call them tomorrow. Truth does that. When it finally walks into a room, it doesn't have to scream. My wife stood frozen. Her parents whispered sharply to each other by the staircase, the edge in their voices barely contained behind forced civility. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Their grip on the narrative had slipped, not because I'd outplayed them, but because they'd overplayed themselves. Documents that once felt like traps now sat exposed on the table, no longer weapons, just evidence. Nothing dramatic happened when the tide turned, but everyone knew it had. A quiet voice behind me, Mr. Lansing, my father's retired banker, asked gently, "Do you want me to stay a while, just in case?" I shook my head. "We're okay. Thank you." His gaze lingered on my father for a beat longer before he nodded and stepped outside. Then it was only us, my wife, her parents, my father, and me. I walked over to the chair where Dad still sat, calm, composed in a way that made me wonder if he'd been waiting for this longer than I had. "You ready?" I asked. He nodded once, not stiffly, not weakly, just enough. I knelt beside him, took his shoes, and helped him ease them on. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. When I finished tying the last knot, I placed my hand on his knee. "We're walking out of here together. You okay with that?" He looked down at me, his voice low. "As long as I'm walking out with you." I helped him to his feet. No rush, no show of strength or weakness, just care. My wife didn't speak. she didn't try to stop us. Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe she knew she shouldn't. We made our way to the entryway, that same threshold we'd crossed in chaos just hours earlier. But this time, we moved slowly, with dignity, step by step. I opened the door. The air outside hit cooler than I remembered, and somehow cleaner. But not everything could be cleaned. I knew that. There were no dramatic reconciliations. No one came running after us with a sudden change of heart. My marriage didn't magically repair itself in the silence that followed. Some things don't survive truth. And that's okay. Because not every ending needs to be bitter. Sometimes it's just done. My father and I reached the curb. I paused for a second and glanced back. The house stood still behind us, lit from within, but dim where it used to feel bright. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. We stood there a moment, breathing, as if adjusting to the weight that had shifted. Then, gently, my father leaned against the car door and slowly bent down. He adjusted one of his laces himself. No help this time. Then he stood and looked over at me. He didn't smile, didn't thank me. He just nodded. Not like a man saved, but like a man finally seen. And we walked. No destination needed, just forward. Past the house, past the night. We didn't speak, and that was the beauty of it. Because after all the noise and strategy and control, sometimes peace is simply found in the space where no one needs to explain anymore. The house faded behind us. Still standing, still silent, but powerless now. Some homes are only buildings, and some nights teach you the difference.